Elaine Ellinger, it's such a pleasure, a delight to have you on my YouTube channel. I really admire you for your for the work you've put in and for the diligence that you've put in. We're talking about your book, A Civilizational Reckoning,
Thank you.
Understanding the Threat, Reclaiming the Future. Now, you kindly sent me a free um, copy
Yes.
here in the UK, which I thank you for. I'm in southern England. I know you spent some time in England in the 70s, and so although you're Canadian, you have a real affinity with this country, don't you?
Oh, I do indeed. I do indeed.
Yeah. And when we first met on Substack, I think we started by saying that I had a Canadian grandfather, so I've got an affinity with Canada as well.
Yes.
Um, now, I finally read the book, and so many things that surprised me and enlightened me, Elaine, in there. Now, you're somebody who knows a lot about Islam. You've been studying it for years, Islam and the Quran. And so, what's interesting is your interest began in 1983 because you had a chance encounter with a Baha'i refugee who'd fled Iran during the revolution. Of course, the revolution started in 1979, didn't it, Elaine?
Yeah.
And at that time, you were working as a child protection social worker in Canada.
Yeah.
Is that something you did for a long time? Is that the bulk of your career, Elaine?
Well, social services certainly, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was in a variety of different departments. Later, I was working with the disabled, but that
yeah.
came from having 40 foster brothers and sisters of every stripe, and we all got along. And I figure, if the kids can get along, the adults can get along, and we just need to work a little harder at it.
Yeah. Now, was Islam something that was the subject of Islam and the Quran? Was it very new to you in 1983, or had you
Oh
given it some
yes.
thought
Oh
and
yes.
studied it a bit before that?
Oh yeah, no, I was absolutely shocked at what had happened to the Baha'i in Iran simply because they were a minority. I mean, the Baha'i are, very gentle people. They recognize everybody's, prophet. They're
Yes.
lovely people. And yet his friends had been killed and tortured. He was lucky to get away with his life. And I was totally shocked. And on reflection, I later realized that I'd had some run-ins with it in the UK as well. I was there in 1974, 75, and I didn't realize what it was at the time. Later, after considerable study, I certainly did
Yeah.
realize. But that's another story. And yes, I was working there. I loved England. I was living
Yeah.
in London, and then I was back again in 1980, 81. But when I went back in 2015, honestly, I have so many wonderful memories of the UK that I didn't want to go to London.
Now, your book, Elaine, is very readable. It's not small print, but it's not large print. It's sort of just a nice size, and it for me it flowed. I just kept turning the pages. I found it very easy to read, and as I said, I was admired by your, I'm going to use the word scholarship, the amount of study you've done, the amount of attention to detail, and many things in here which many people will be totally unaware of, which did surprise me. Before I go into the first one, Elaine, because I mean, honestly, we could talk for hours on this. I see
We
that,
could,
yeah,
but we
in
won't.
20, but who's going to listen for hours?
No, no.
Some
And
people.
if I may, I'd like to mention right now that I mean, I think certainly in the UK, people are aware of the Islamization of the country and have very
Yeah.
serious concerns about that, as they should. And
Yes.
there is a way to address this that's 100% English and humane. And
Yeah.
we'll get to that at the end of this talk. So I don't
Yeah.
want people to leave early.
Elaine, you founded the Perspectives on Islam Society in 2023 for the express purpose of providing public education on the primary teachings of Islam in the context of current events. And you're really writing this and talking about this stuff so that the non-Muslim can understand and can
Oh
can,
yes,
can get a
and
grasping of.
yeah, and
Yeah.
even Muslims who are open-minded. I have had Muslim women ask me questions and tell me they were afraid to ask the imam because you're not allowed to question the teachings.
Oh,
And certainly women who have escaped Afghanistan. I've had contact with these women, and anyway, we won't get to that today, but
No,
certainly for Muslims as well, because many of them are very poorly informed themselves. Many.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Again, that's something that I wouldn't have necessarily appreciated, Elaine. So thank you for that. Now, the first point, so jihad is jihad is a term that most people have heard. You might want to very briefly tell people what that means in a nutshell. But the funding of jihad,
Yes.
which jihad is spreading,
Yes.
it is gradually encroaching on Western nations.
Yeah.
A lot of people haven't caught up with this, or they don't want to think about it, or they're not aware of it at all, or they'd rather not think about it. Um, in terms of the funding, there's a term that you've mentioned many times in the book, Elaine, zakat. Have I pronounced that correctly? Zakat?
Yeah. Well, as far as I know, I honestly don't worry too much about the Arabic pronunciation. It's very fluid. The spelling is very fluid. Just do the
Yeah.
best you can with it.
So what is zakat, and why is it something that you want to focus on for this particular show, in
Well,
terms of
because it's described as almsgiving, and you hear this constantly about how wonderfully generous people are in Islam and donating to the zakat, and it's 2.5% is the rate. But what most people don't realize is that it is not almsgiving in the Western sense, because it has 8 categories. And people, like to say, well, Islam is, some of the things about Islam that they hear, jihad, et cetera, they don't witness in the street, but they hear about it and they go, well, that's barbaric, that's over there. But Islam doesn't change just because it crosses a border. And for 14 centuries, this is a very organized civilization that has had a taxation system called zakat. It is one of the 5 pillars. And in fact, one of Abu Bakr, after Muhammad died, he said there was the Ridda Wars. A lot of people thought, okay, well, Muhammad's gone now. We don't have to pay this tribute anymore. And he said, if they withhold even one goat from me, that they used to pay to Muhammad, I will kill them. I will fight them for it. So it is extremely important. And this taxation system includes almsgiving, certainly, but it also includes dawah, which is the bringing people, the proselytizing and trying to bring them to Islam. It also includes jihad. And the money, the zakat that is donated by every Muslim now, okay, every Muslim has to give this if they meet a minimum threshold, and the threshold is quite low. They have to pay this. And 1/8 of that, it's in the Quran, it's in the Islamic accounting books, has to go to jihad. There is no two ways about it. And we realize, in any Western country that 80 or 90% of the designated terrorist groups are Islamic. They're under surveillance. Well, they have to get their money from somewhere. And what it actually says, I have it pulled up here somewhere. There we are. I'll read it to you from now. People don't really understand that well what Sharia is. And Sharia is a combination of not only the Quran, it is the ordained way of Islam. And where is that ordained way found? It is found in the Quran, but also in the life of Muhammad, which is the larger portion by far. The hadith, the stories and traditions about his life, the seerah, the biography. You could fill a library with what there is to be known about, Muhammad and the hadith, the traditions about him. And he had a career change. So Islam is basically a little schizophrenic. It has, which is it's in the beginning he was just a preacher, and he was intolerant to people who didn't want to follow him. But when he migrated to Medina with very few followers after 13 years, he became something of a warlord. And that's when the whole business started with the jihad. It had not happened before then. And Sharia was developing. And as it developed, the zakat was divided into these 8 categories. And I was looking, so rather than have to read all of the Quran and all of the hadith, they have a jurisprudence. So they have the scholars who will boil it all down and make it very simple. So here we have a book called Reliance of the Traveler. And
yeah,
this is over 1,200 pages. And that's what I'm referring to right now, where they've looked at Quran 960, which sets out the 8 categories, and they say quite clearly, I'll read it to you. The 7th category is those fighting for Allah, meaning people engaged in Islamic military operations for whom no salary has been allotted in the army roster, but who are volunteers for jihad without remuneration. So for the 8 categories, including the jihad, this money is distributed. So there's people who collect the money, and they get zakat as well, because this is like a public employee or something. But what is done with it is, I want to read Quran 960 here. There are commentaries about the Quran, and the commentary I use most is Ibn Kathir. And that, if something is a little confusing to you, then you read Ibn Kathir, and that will explain it exactly. And he clearly says, in regards to Quran 960, in the cause of Allah is exclusive for the benefit of the fighters of jihad who do not receive compensation from the Muslim treasury. So
Right.
it has to be financed, and it has been financed for 14 centuries. It is a complete civilization.
Elaine, so nothing's changed or moved with the times here. That nothing's been modernized. This is as stringent and as set in stone, if you like, now, or they want it to be, as much as it would have been centuries ago. So there's been no changing, no moving with the times, because I know you've already mentioned it doesn't change when it crosses borders,
Yes,
but
no, it
it
can.
doesn't change with time either. Hasn't changed with time either.
And jihad doesn't change. And in fact, Bukhari is considered the very best Sunni collection of hadith about Muhammad. And in book 88, which is the book of jihad, he writes, the prophet said, that's Muhammad said, my livelihood, my living is under the shade of my spear, and he who disobeys my orders will be humiliated by paying jizya. And jizya is, for the people of the book, they were allowed 3 options. You could convert to Islam, you could pay the jizya, or you could die. So those were your choices. Some were not even given those choices because they weren't considered people of the book. But the jizya is basically the penalty with humiliation that non-Muslims have to undergo. And that happened with the spread of Islam, the conquest, which never would have happened without jihad. It would have been impossible. And without the financing, which came from the booty. A whole chapter of the Quran is called the spoils of war.
Right. Yeah. Now, the zakat funds are only supposed to go to Muslim recipients. They're
Yes.
not supposed to go to non. Is that correct? Yeah,
Oh,
that's
yes,
categorical. That's a
absolutely. Yeah,
categorical.
it's
It
not
says.
your typical charity, whereas there's an awful lot of Western charity goes towards Islamic organizations, I must say, but it is a one-way street. So I wanted to mention also, because we're talking
Yeah.
about the UK here, is that in 2025, the UK Commission for Countering Extremism came out with a report called Sacred Violence, where they actually decided to have a look at
Sacred
ideology.
violence.
Sacred violence, yes. And with
Right.
only
Okay.
6.5% of the population, jihad accounted for 85% of the offenses. And what he did is look at the ideology by picking up the books that they were using. And, we've all heard about, the books of the Muslim Brotherhood, etc. But what they didn't look at was the one book that all of those quote. Like if you look at Raymond Ibram, and back in, I don't know, long time ago, maybe 2 decades ago, wrote this. This is the Al Qaeda reader. And in
Yeah.
it, he took Al Qaeda's writing, okay, and he translated it. Well, it's very exciting, all right, because it's all about jihad, but it quotes the Quran and the Hadith all the way through. So when they did this report about sacred violence, the one thing they absolutely refused to look at is that all of those books that they're reading are based on the Quran and the Hadith, and the imams and the jihadis use the exact same texts. There's no difference. We hear about what's supposed to be radical, imams, but they're not at all. They're devout. They're reading exactly what the doctrine says, because jihad is exactly what they're supposed to do. And the money for that comes from the zakat that every Muslim pays. And in fact, in Canada, the National Council of Canadian Muslims is authorized to collect zakat under that specific category. I have a copy of the letter authorizing them. And the Canadian Council of Imams that authorized it is tied in with the UN. And the UN is involved in so many Islamic,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
Uh,
this is something that's an
mhm.
aspect that most people, let's face it, Elaine, would have no idea or concept of or about the connection between the UN and Islam. And
Well,
that goes
yeah,
back
just
how far? How far back does that go, Elaine?
well, 1948, because the
Wow.
Islamic countries refused to sign on. And whereas they allow everyone to believe that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the guiding light behind the United Nations, it is not at all, because the largest, wealthiest, most powerful voting bloc, because they vote as a bloc, is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And they follow Sharia. They have their own declaration, the Cairo Declaration, and it is antithetical to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Right.
Islam breaches, is contravenes virtually every article in the Universal Declaration of Human
And
Rights
and
and
and,
your own
and you were
laws.
saying, and a really salient point that I keep going back to, Elaine, you mentioned earlier, and you've mentioned a few times, that even a lot of Muslims themselves are not fully aware of and don't fully appreciate just how far this goes
Well,
or
yes,
in the
because
Quran.
if there's any of them that have concerns, and I'm sure there are, they're told those are extremists. And what's happening in Afghanistan? Well, that's a bad government, and it's the
Yeah,
Americans' fault. What happened in Iran, again, that's the Americans' fault. And, it's, they really believe that because they don't realize that Sharia is actually being enforced in those countries. And that is the reason that they have the highest rates of execution in the world, oftentimes simply for blasphemy, which, I mean, Islam does not allow freedom of religion. It does not allow equality
no,
between men and women. And yet they're doing everything they can to facilitate it as if it's only a religion when Islam
yeah,
itself does not identify as a religion. I've got a
no,
book here. This is a school book, an Islamic school book for an Islamic school. And it says quite clearly on page 2, Islam is not a religion, it is a deen, it is a way of life. And I'll just
hmm,
mention one other young woman, a Muslim
yeah,
woman in the UK last year. A terrible thing happened to her. She was brought up and fired, okay, made a public spectacle of because she had been, well, she's a police officer and someone had used her coffee mug. And she had written in a social media post, and then they found more social media posts like this, those kufar lips, and that's a non Muslim, okay, which the doctrine defines us as Naj, dirty, which is why you're not allowed in the city of Mecca. But so she said, these kufar lips have been all over my mug. I'm never going to use that thing again. Well, here the woman, she's front page news now, but this is exactly what she's taught in school. And the UK government is facilitating that. And then when she comes out and actually says what she's being taught, they don't get punished. She gets punished. Like,
yeah,
who are the
yeah.
people who are authorizing all of this? They should be held to account.
And we hear, Elaine, we hear the word jihadi a lot. Jihadi. Now, is that a misnomer? Is that
Oh no,
accurate?
no, that's
Do people are
absolutely, or
using that?
mujahideen. This
Yeah,
is and this is an honorable position. Okay, it's like
jihadi.
someone asked Muhammad, what is the best deed, and he said jihad. That is the best deed that there is, and this is how you get to paradise, and you're rewarded, and this is a great honor. So it's a completely inverse of Western teaching. But
Yeah,
jihadi is the right word. When people say, ISIS, Al Qaeda, all of the different groups, this is simply platoons. These are just platoons. All right. They are all jihadis. And that's how they should be referred to because it's a distraction to think that these different groups, 80 or 90 of them in any country, right? That these are anything but platoons in the army of Islam, which
uh,
demands it.
yeah. Elaine Ellinger, what were you going to tell us about? You were going to talk about deception
Yes,
and
yes.
lying. Now, obviously, you'd hear about the terms deception or the word lying, and you think, well, that's counter to religion. But is it
Yeah.
true that this deception is kind of endorsed openly in the Quran? Am I mistaken in saying that?
I just want to say one more thing about zakat, though, and that is
Yes,
when you
please.
buy halal and when you have Islamic finance and all of these things, you are contributing to zakat, which turns around and now funds jihad. So every bit of commerce that the West involves itself in with Islam generates, which is now billions of dollars. Okay, this
Yeah.
is the industry as a whole is like trillions, and it finances jihad. So for heaven's sakes, we should stop doing that. But
Yes.
deception, yes, there are several
Sounds like you might
kinds.
be right, Elaine. Yeah.
Yes, most people are
Wow.
familiar with takia, and that is out and out lying. But there's also kitman, which is, to sort of deceive, to cover up something. This is all allowed because Muhammad allowed it. It began with he wanted someone killed, and one of his followers said, "Well, may I deceive him so that I can do that?" And Muhammad said yes, and so he did, and he deceived him, and so that is allowed. And it said, "Oh well, this is allowed in the case of war," but for Islam, the doctrine itself is a declaration of war against all non-Muslims, basically and that includes everyone, whether it's Hindu or Baha'i or that is what the doctrine demands.
Yeah.
Oh yes, there's many different kinds, including
So
Maruna. Which
it's so all powerful and it's so supreme
yeah,
and
yeah,
and superior that sometimes deception or lying is justifiable for that
yeah.
cause.
There's a great deal more about it in my
Mm,
book. I do hope people will pick it up and read it. But there's a principle called darura, and that is necessity overcomes obligation. So when you think back, for many years there was none of this unrest that we're having now and the demands in the workplace and things for Sharia, which is what it
no.
is. Okay. um, that wasn't happening. And that's because of the principle of Darura. Necessity overcomes obligation. But every time a politician agrees to something like Islamic finance, now that option doesn't exist anymore. So Muslims that may have been very happy with the financial, the mortgage or whatever they had before, now they're not allowed to do that because an Islamic option exists, which the West has created. They had no reason to introduce Islamic finance, but they did. And so now Muslims are being and there's a very good book. I think it's called The $300 billion Deception or something. It's by a Muslim. It was written a couple of decades ago. And by the way, he risked himself to tell people that this financing they're doing now really is an invention. That originally riba, which is the interest, referred to usury because it means both. It means interest and it means usury. Okay, the same word for both. And this has been invented, and it was certainly promoted in Pakistan, which basically Islamized the country through, turning the institutions like finance in making them Islamic. But now where was I going with that? Yeah, he ends with a fatwa saying, I hope there won't be a fatwa against me now for saying this. But what they have invented is basically interest. So instead of doing a genuine business deal, all right, what they'll say is, okay, you want the money for a certain period of time. They'll figure out what the interest would have been, and they'll say, this is what it costs for my services. They work it out. So it is actually interest in another form. And it also has a form of finance called hawala, which is used for money laundering because it isn't regulated properly. Yeah.
Ever so briefly, Elaine, what do we mean by fatwa? Because we hear that most people have heard that term, fatwa.
Oh, well, that's a ruling by Islamic scholars of assorted. That there are many people. It's in my book that can
Yeah.
issue a fatwa, depending on whether it's Sunni or Shia. The level of competence that is required to do this. But there are literally millions of fatwas being issued every year. There was one recently. It was signed by over 500 Islamic scholars right around the world, of the scholars of the Al-Aqsa flood, they called themselves. They were calling on mujahideen all around the world now to go out and attack Jews. And of course, we've just seen what happened in Australia only yesterday with those people celebrating Hanukkah. Numerous sheiks, et cetera, that will come out and say things like uh, Sheikh Thrada here in Canada, who came out and said, the worst sin in the world is to congratulate, the Kafirs, the non-Muslims, on their false festivals. So festivals are quite often a target because, they're forbidden in Islam. They say, like the whole concept of Christmas and
Yeah,
Christ, and anyway, it's all forbidden in
Elaine,
Islam.
Elaine. I mean, now at the moment, I'm in the UK. You're in Canada now. In the UK, we have huge changes happening, major issues. More and more people are becoming aware of these issues that we've just touched on today, just scratched the surface. Now, in Appendix A in your book here, you touch on the UK and how legally, so what the way forward could be for the UK
Yes,
legally, or
yes,
rather, I'm going to say it, I don't want to use too emotive language, the way out,
yes.
UK legally, through 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 Parliament. Now, how would you outline what advice would you give? So, what is the way forward for the UK? Because we're at the moment we're
Well,
in a bit of a
what
we are in a
what
bit of an
it's not,
off-time moment, aren't we?
I'll start with saying what it's not is asking Muslims to tell us how to do this. Okay, do we need to figure this out for ourselves? Because every
Yeah,
time you're seeking Islamic advice, you are further Islamizing your country for one reason or another. And I'll just give an example now from Hansard. Now, this just happened last week. All right. So they had the grooming gang inquiry, independent inquiry,
yeah,
and that was December 9th. And Paul Waugh, I don't know if I pronounced that right, he says, does the Home Secretary agree that we must hold to account anyone who ignored these crimes and that no council, police officer, social worker, or racial group should ever be exempt from the scrutiny of this new inquiry? Now, I'd like to mention right now that those responsible need to include corporations. For instance, the book Easy Meat by Peter McLaughlin was written in 2014, meticulously researched about those grooming gangs, and it was delisted from Amazon. So, a lot of it has got to do with commerce, and, they see this burgeoning market and they want to support it, and they suppress any criticism, valid criticism, factual criticism about Islam. But they do not fact check anything that is written that is in favor of Islam. That's fine. Now, some of that goes back to, Charlie Hebdo and things like that, and it's a risk, assessment whether they should have anything again. But they delisted this book, Easy Meat. So then in 2025, we have all these parliamentarians saying, well, we don't know anything about it. Well, the reason they don't is people like me are suppressed, and they are doing their best to facilitate everything Islam at the same time. So to continue asking people who adhere to Islam for answers, which is what happened here. He says, does the Home Secretary agree? Well, then a fellow by the name of Edward Lee, conservative, or perhaps it's Edward Lay, conservative, pipes up and
mm,
he says, the Home Secretary knows that I admire her personally. She is a devout Muslim lady, and I share many of her values. I think she is uniquely well placed to comment on this. So he's asking her, she's a Muslim, so she should have the answer, right?
yeah, yeah.
So they're looking, they don't want to know from any source except Islamic what is going on with Islam. This is insane. So he says, I think she is uniquely well placed to explain and give us confidence.
Yeah,
What is it about these Muslim men that meant that they felt they could behave in this way? And can she explain if this is a small minority? How is she supposed to know? What a ridiculous question. Is she an expert on the grooming gangs? I mean, really. But this is the answer that he wants. He wants to be placated. He says, can she see what I'm getting at? Can she explain this in a way that some of us cannot? Because nobody can accuse her of being racist. Well, why can't anyone accuse her? Why? Because she's a Muslim? What? And no one can accuse her of not wanting to get to the truth. Yet Islam allows deception and may even make it obligatory if it is in the cause of Allah. To her credit, she said, it is hard to be a spokesman for billions of people around the world. She says, gentlemen, from my personal perspective, based on my constituency experience, and from the community I belong to back home, there is nothing Muslim or Islamic about the acts these evil men have perpetrated. And I want to say that this is no way to conduct an inquiry. If you want to know, go to the doctrine. And I can assure you there is a great deal in the doctrine that supports exactly what's happening with the grooming gangs, which we won't get into here. But yes, the companies that suppress truth, factual truth, meticulously researched truth, and they're putting basically what do you call them, gatekeepers, to make sure that nothing is going to blow back on them, that oh, you've been critical, they're afraid of being called an Islamophobe or something.
Elaine, has there been a major grooming gang scandal or inquiry in the news in Canada in recent years, many
No,
years ago, or
no,
currently nothing
no,
similar? Although
not
we know
not
that we
yeah,
know that it
not
will
that
be
I'm
going
aware
on.
of. But there
No.
was in Holland. And in Holland, it was Moroccan Muslims, and now we've got the Afghans joining in. But the common denominator is always Islam, because the girls aren't veiled; they're considered available. We won't get into all that here, but please read my
No,
book and
no.
you'll understand
Yeah,
that this,
yeah.
yeah, of course. But
Now,
we're going to
yeah,
get to the end.
just wanted to make sure they could see the whole. Can they see the whole cover there? Yeah, the whole book. Yeah. And
I'm glad to see it. It looks well worn.
yes, it's been on trains. It's been from the southern England to the Midlands and back several times. It's travelled around. Yeah, yeah.
So yes, a
Now, Elaine,
solution is needed, a peaceful solution that's kind to everyone, because
yeah,
not everybody is involved in all of this. And
no,
if I could maybe I'll just open this up, and if I could share my screen, and I'll go through it.
yeah, yeah.
All right.
Please,
So
thank you,
let me
Elaine.
just
Yeah,
figure out how to share the screen here. Sound. There we go. Share. All right. So can you see that?
yeah. Appendix A, England Freedom of Religion Integrity Act.
That's
Yeah,
it. Yeah, I'm just going to get
yeah,
that out of my way. All right. And integrity is important. Okay. We're, unlike the UN that is not following a moral compass, it's got the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Cairo Declaration, which are, totally opposed to each other. So we want integrity. So we need integrity of religion in the UK and frankly, right across the West. So this is an act to protect the integrity of religious freedom. We have religious freedom. We need to protect the integrity of that through lawful qualification standards. And the Freedom of Religion Integrity Act is fully consistent with English law because it regulates legal recognition, not belief, and it protects the constitutional principle that no parallel system of law overrides Parliament. So England has constitutional law based on parliamentary sovereignty, common law statute, European Convention of Human Rights, and the Human Rights Act. And there is no constitutional barrier to Parliament setting legal qualification standards for recognition. And in fact, it does this all the time. So does Canada, so does the US. They have to decide what it qualifies for charitable status, for marriage, obscenity, terrorism. There are definitions, and the definitions do not regulate belief. People can believe whatever they want, freedom of religion, okay? But they do regulate legal recognition and consequences.
yeah.
So what it does is it protects religion, but doesn't grant automatic legal status. So under the UK law, individuals are free to believe, worship, and practice privately. The state is not required to grant legal privileges to every belief system, and it can set objective criteria. So Islam self-identifies as a deen, a complete civilization. It has a taxation system. It has a military division. It is a complete way of life. It has rules for everything. Everything is either obligatory, recommended, permitted, discouraged, or forbidden. Everything. I mean, even how you brush your teeth, which foot goes first into a room. It regulates everything. So the deen is a complete system of law and governance. Sharia claims authority over civil, criminal, family, and political life. Not only that, it enforces it, and it places it outside the category of purely religious belief. There is no obligation in UK law to recognize a parallel legal order as a religion. So the threshold is consistent with the universal human rights, equality before the law, freedom from coercion, supremacy of civil law. And these principles already underpin the Human Rights Act of 1998, the European Convention on Human Rights. So the act does not, it enforces existing commitments. It does not introduce new restrictions because we are bound to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Islam is not.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah, it doesn't ban mosques. It doesn't police doctrine. What it does do is it establishes legal criteria for legal recognition, prevents parallel legal systems. The Sharia courts in the UK have been operating since the 80s. That never should have been allowed. I mean, there were people that were being judged under Sharia law in England, totally unfairly, that never should have been permitted. I mean, they were
And
entitled to the same law as everyone else.
where Elaine are the Sharia courts? What are they visible? What buildings are they in? I mean, I wasn't. Sorry?
It can happen at a mosque, but not necessarily
Yeah,
Islamic centers. But it was
yeah.
recognized in Hansard about 10 years
Wow.
ago that there were 85 Sharia courts operating in the UK at the time. And
I'm sure there are
they
many people who don't know about that.
yeah, well, they have absolute legal authority under the Arbitration Act. So they're allowed to operate and have a different system of law. I mean, there are people in the UK and frankly in Canada and the US, all across the West now, who don't even bother to learn the new language. This is a real problem now
Yeah.
with the immigration in Europe. And they live in basically ghettos. You know, they establish the mosque and gather around the mosque, and they shop. Everything is done. Not integrating whatsoever, which is forbidden. They're not supposed to integrate. Anyway, so the state remains sovereign. And what I want to point out is that Islam enforces, like just recently in Texas, there was it was made public about this imam who was outside of a shop and he was bringing in other Muslims to complain. He had a bullhorn because they dared to sell, pork or alcohol or something, because that is what the doctrine requires. This is Sharia, and it is so different. People need to understand this. What Sharia says, he who amongst you sees something abominable should modify it with the help of his hand. That's why that little girl in Paris was beat up for selling alcohol. And it's not just against other Muslims. This is also enforced against non-Muslims because they are not behaving according to Sharia. When we have the public prayers happening in the airport, there was a Hindu fellow in Pakistan. He actually had his restaurant open during Ramadan. Well, Hindus aren't Muslim. He was killed. It was a mob that attacked him. So they should modify it. This is what is required. If they don't have strength enough to do it, they should do it with their tongue. And if they have not strength enough to do it, they should abhor it with their heart. So, yep, there's my book. So I'll just stop the share now. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I've still got to master some of the Zoom knowledge. I see you can do quite a bit. That's great, Elaine.
I did wander a bit
Now,
off topic. I'm sorry.
no, that's normally me that does things like that. So, a civilizational reckoning, understanding the threat, reclaiming the future. Let's get this book out there. Very readable. And
The
yeah,
legislation for 4 countries is at the end, but
yeah.
I received a request from people in Austria, and I was able to produce it for Austria. So if you want this for your country, let me know. I think I'll be whipping one up for Australia pretty quick. As
Yeah.
long as it basically, we need to really understand about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Nobody else needs to worry about this. When this law is first introduced, it will be a shock to people because so many people have a wrong impression of Islam. They don't know any of the stuff I was just telling you
Mm,
because of the way it's taught in the schools,
yeah. Yeah.
which is totally inaccurate. So that they'll be really shocked, and you'll find people coming out and they'll be saying, well, you'll have the Christians and the Jews and everybody else worried. They have nothing to worry about. it is only the Islamic countries that refuse to sign on to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that is because of Sharia. And Sharia is a competing adversarial system of governance that is now
Yeah.
taking over the
I
West,
mean,
and something needs
just
to
a
be
couple
done.
of. I mean, I haven't really had any encounters so far myself. But I think I may have nearly had one a couple of weeks ago on YouTube. I did a video very briefly about a resurgence of church going and Christianity in the UK, which is happening. People are going back to church, and I come from an Anglican background. I suppose I'm a liberal, progressive Christian, you might say. And I just, the main point of my very brief video was highlighting that I hope that it didn't lead to going backwards on LGBT things.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't want us to go backwards and start having a go at gay and lesbian people and going back to how it used to be. So the resurgence of Christianity, I said,
Well,
was a
then you
great thing.
definitely don't want Islam.
Yeah, and then somebody, there was some sort of born again fundamentalist Christians who left comments saying to me that I needed to be, born again, etc., etc., and stuff, quite sort of fundamentalist stuff. But there was somebody, and he said, there is only one true religion. There is only one true faith. And I got a feeling, I didn't pursue it, the conversation, but I got a feeling this person may have been telling me that Islam was the only one. And he was kind of saying in his comment, Islam will now is going to dominate. Islam is going to be the one you're going to be adhering to. That's the
Yeah.
only thing. He didn't say it too explicitly, but I think that's what he was getting at. And I was going to answer and say, how do we determine which is the only true religion or true faith? But I thought,
Oh, well,
no,
you don't. Muhammad did
leave
a
it.
long time ago.
Yeah, leave it. I thought I'll leave it, but I think that's what he was alluding to.
Yeah.
This
Well,
person I was.
there are certain things. I mean, Islamic disputation, all right, is
Yeah.
an art form, all right. But there are
Mm,
certain things that are off the table because it is believed to be the religion of truth. That's it.
mm.
And there is no debating certain things. For instance, that a man can have four wives, that a woman's testimony is worth half that of a man's,
Oh,
that we are infidels. There are things that are if it's in the Quran, you don't debate it. That's all there is
no.
to it.
Yeah.
If
Uh,
Muhammad said it, that's it. You don't debate it. That is truth. Okay, that is not how we generally understand truth in the West, but that is how it's understood, and that it will be the only religion. And actually, it says what it does is it appropriates other religions. In fact, Muhammad's genealogy can't be traced back farther than about 30 years BC. Okay, that's as far as they can actually trace it. But they claim that Abraham and Noah and Jesus were all Muslim. So it's yeah,
Elaine, I
people
think we
don't know
should
that either.
we should do more programs where we go into other areas in the near future. I think that might be a good idea. Elaine,
Good
just
night.
just to very briefly recap on where people can get this book right now.
Amazon,
And
Amazon
Amazon,
or Apple. Yeah, and it's
and you're
being translated into French. So there are two
yeah,
volumes now. If they just look up my name,
great.
Elaine Ellinger, on Amazon, they will find it.
Ellinger.
That's it.
That's your surname, yeah. Well, it's great. You're my new Canadian friend. I only met you this year. I think I've only got one other friend who's way over the other side of Canada in Montreal, in Quebec.
Yeah,
So right over the other side.
yeah. Well, good.
Oh,
Nice to have some variety.
this has been wonderful, and I'm going to use a cliche, an eye opener to say the least, an absolute eye opener. Thank you, Elaine.
You're very welcome. And thank you, Jonathan, for giving me the opportunity to share this with people because there's far too much. I mean, we could spend years talking about the problems, but let's
Yeah,
spend some time talking about the solution, please,
yeah,
because we're
and getting
running
to
out of time.
and what's good is you've got to the point. You've been able to get to the point today, which is good.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need that, don't we? I mean, I'm a bit of a waffler. So thank you, Elaine. All the best. Speak to you very soon.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine.